Hi, I'm John Sabula from John's Nature for All, and I'd like to share with you some of the things I have found out about milkweeds, life on a milkweed. It's an ecosystem on a single plant. There's a lot more to it than I'm going to get into, but this I think is an introduction for those of you perhaps, who aren't really that familiar with milkweed. Unfortunately, name milkweed really does the plant a disservice. They're very beautiful plants, they're flowering plants, and they hold a very important place in nature. All milkweeds are a member of the dogbane family, and dogbane, of course, means poisonous to dogs, which they are. No, there's over 2,200 species in the family. The sap of most, if not all of them, is toxic to dogs, cats, horses, and for some people with sensitive skin, it can cause skin blisters. I was surprised to find out, however, that it's used in folklore remedies and in chewing gum. Once upon a time, as the name of the hemp dogbane might suggest, it was used to make rope, and it's the host plant for a number of interesting insects, including the dogbane tiger moth and the dogbane leaf beetle. So, dogbane tiger moth looks rather similar to the clearwing moth here. Here's a dogbane leaf beetle, and over here you have a dogbane tiger moth. But within the genus Asclepias, there are many milkweeds. In fact, there's over 140 species. Originally, they were native to North and South America. They're found worldwide. They get their name from a milky sap that contains a toxic called cardiac glycosides. Here in Illinois, there's 24 to 27 species. The most common one is called the common milkweed. It's the one most people know, and it's host to over 450 species of insects. I was interested in seeing the distribution of the various milkweeds. Like I said, Illinois has 27 species. Cook County has 14. In my own DuPage County, there's 9 distinct species and 1 hybrid. Nearby Kane County has 12, Lake County has 10, McHenry has 9, and Will County has 12 species. Here you see prairie milkweed, and if you look over here is an insect we'll talk about later. It's the large milkweed bug. Here are some of the kinds of milkweed you might see if you're out and about in DuPage County, especially in an open prairie like at College of DuPage's Kirt Prairie. The butterfly milkweed, which is one that's widely available in cultivation. My personal favorite, the swamp milkweed, whorled milkweed, and quite a few other species. The life cycle of the most native milkweeds are very similar. They're perennials, which means they come back every spring, although they're quite often slow to emerge from the soil. They do go to seed in the fall. In the spring, the seed germinates. In the first year, it sprouts roots. Not much growth is usually seen. The second year, though, it develops foliage, and the third year, flowers. Depending on the species, it may spread by rhizomes. This is especially true of common milkweed. Here we see a picture of common milkweed in the fall, just as it's going to seed. Now, hundreds of insects depend on milkweed, but I'm going to talk just about the most common ones, the ones that I see most often. Let's start with a pest. It's a non-native insect, an aphid, the oleander aphid. It was originally native to the Mediterranean area, but it's now found worldwide. Like most aphids, it's parthenogenic. That means there's only females, although, as I read some of the literature, males have been produced in the laboratory. They're not considered really detrimental to milkweed plants, but they are a vector for viruses that affect and kill plants that we're interested in as food crops: beans, citrus, cucumber, watermelon, zucchini, tobacco, and so on. Another true bug is the large milkweed bug. It's about 3/4 of an inch long. It has a very wide distribution. It's hard to describe its life cycle because it depends on the area. In the south, they're pretty much year-round. In the northern area, the populations come from the south in the spring. They migrate to warmer areas. Some of them enter diapause at the start of fall or when things start to cool down. That is, they slow down, they find a place. It's not hibernation. They live over the winter on fats they built up. Others have got from the south moved north with the flowering of milkweed. So depending on the time of year, maybe the location, you either have bugs that have overwintered or you have a population coming from the south. They feed mainly on the seeds of the milkweed. They insert their beak into the seed. They put in a fluid that digests the seed, and then they suck it up. They're not considered harmful to the milkweed plant. They have quite a life cycle. Over here on the right-hand side, you see the top photograph. You see various nymphs from very small ones to large ones. Here in the bottom right-hand side, you see a couple of bugs that are just about ready to become adults and a slightly younger one. And over on the left, you have a mating pair of the bugs. This particular photo shows quite a number of the stages on a single milkweed pod. Very similar to the large milkweed bug is the small milkweed bug. It's about 1/2 inch long, whereas the large milkweed bug has kind of a black bar across its abdomen, its wings. The small milkweed bug has what looks to me to be either an orange X or a black heart. They have one generation a year. The adults manage to overwinter. They come out in the spring, about the time the milkweed is emerging. They lay their eggs. They have a varied diet compared to the large milkweed bug. Yes, they'll drink flower nectar, the sap from milkweed seeds, but they're also predators on various flies, bees, and beetles. Once the milkweed seeds mature, though, they become their main food source. And there's several other bugs that are considered imitators, the false milkweed bug and the box elder. Here's a false milkweed bug. You can see it looks very similar, has an orange X, happens to be on goldenrod. Milkweed is very patriotic, isn't it? It's gone to war. During World War II, the floss from the kapok tree, which was used for life jackets, became unavailable as Japan took control of the islands where these trees grew. Milkweed floss was substituted because it was waterproof and buoyant. It took quite a bit of floss, though, 40 pounds to make one life jacket. And if you've ever handled milkweed floss, you know how extremely light it is. It was also interesting that the United States experimented with milkweed sap as a substitute for rubber, and I don't include it here, but they also considered using the fibers to make rope or cords. A small insect that I see quite frequently on my milkweed is the red-banded leafhopper. They're related to cicadas. They have a wide range from Panama north to Canada. The individuals don't do a lot of damage, but if there's a lot on a plant, they can be damaging, although I've never seen more than one or two on a plant at any one time. They do feed on plants, including milkweeds. One of the things that they do that can be damaging to the plant is that they expel the excess sugars, which cause damages to the leaf. And a little bit of their life history: the females lay eggs in a leaf, not on the leaf. The nymphs develop inside the leaf, overwinter, and then come out in the spring. And these leafhoppers manage to have one or more generations a year. Well, we were talking about insects with only three life stages: egg, nymph, adults. Now we're going to talk about some of the higher insects, which are beetles, bees, and butterflies, and they all have a complete four-stage. Now I know this looks very much like a ladybug or lady beetle, but it's not. It's the swamp milkweed leaf beetle. There's over 1,400 species of leaf beetles in North America. Many of them are very specific about the kind of leaf they'll eat. In the case of the milkweed leaf beetles, they'll eat the larvae, and adults feed on the leaves of the milkweed, and the adults can be seen on the flowers. The females lay their eggs underneath the leaves. The larvae feed on the leaf, and the larvae and females both may eat eggs. I think that's kind of an interesting habit. The males do not eat eggs. When the larvae are ready to pupate, they drop to the ground. The adults go through diapause in the winter. They drop down in the leaf litter, and maybe you've seen posters and heard people encouraging not to rake your leaves up in the fall. Well, that's because leaf beetles and other insects overwinter in the leaves. One of my favorite milkweed insects is the red milkweed beetle. It's about 3/4 of an inch long, and it lives almost exclusively on common milkweed. I tried to think if I've ever seen it on any of the other milkweeds I encounter, and I really don't think I have. The adults will eat the leaves. The larvae, though, are underground. They're eating the roots of the milkweed. They have an interesting behavior. The adults will open leaf veins, and that decreases the amount of sap that gets into the leaf, and it makes it easier for them to chew the leaf, eat the leaf, and digest what they've eaten. If you pick them up or otherwise disturb them, they click. When they're near another beetle, they make a purring sound. Sometimes, if it's very quiet and you manage to get your ear very close, you can detect this. The females lay their eggs at the base of the milkweed in the stem, and like I said earlier, the larvae feed on the milkweed roots through the fall. They overwinter as larvae, pupate, and then they come out in the spring. And you often find several of them, and I often see mating pairs on milkweeds. Another beetle is called the goldenrod soldier beetle, and although it is found quite often on, as the name suggests, goldenrods and other yellow flowers, it does visit other species of flowers, including milkweeds. They feed on aphids and caterpillars, but also on pollen, which pollen is a good source of protein, which is why bees, for example, eat pollen and bring it back to their hives, their nest. Perhaps the most famous milkweed insect is the monarch butterfly. It belongs to a very large family. Now, originally, monarchs were found throughout the United States and northern South America. They've been introduced around the world. They're found in Hawaii, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and a few other places. They got their name from the King William III of England. One of his titles was Prince of Orange, and of course you can see the monarch is very orange. Most of the North American population is more or less migratory. The Florida population tends not to be migratory, and just very recently, a population was found in South Carolina that probably spends the winter in some of the low-lying coastal islands. Here you have a picture of a female monarch laying an egg. They lay them one at a time underneath the milkweed leaf. The caterpillars come out, and caterpillars are essentially eating machines. And it's interesting to speculate that caterpillars are really almost a different organism from the adult butterfly. Caterpillars spend their entire life eating and growing. That's their purpose in life. And in fact, because they eat of what they eat, they build up proteins that help the adults survive and build up fat. It's very unusual to find two on a same leaf or even on the same plant. I suspect what happened here is two different females laid their eggs. The caterpillar in the top right is eating the leaf, but he's also going into a pre-cocoon or chrysalis making shape called jaying. And here you have the monarch chrysalis. You can see it's a very pale green with these golden dots. Monarchs seek nectar. They do visit milkweeds. They visit a lot of other flowers too, at least 17 species. I enjoy looking at the photographs I take of monarch butterflies and trying to identify the flower they're at. They're not a very effective pollinator, but they do spread pollen. And they use their vision to locate flowers as well as find a mate and find a host plant. Some research suggests they rely more on the color than the shape. What I thought was interesting as I researched this was that butterfly weed is slightly more toxic than other milkweeds. But monarchs tend to visit it for the nectar, but they tend not to use it as a host plant. I don't recall ever seeing a monarch laying an egg on any butterfly weed, nor have I recall seeing any caterpillars, monarch caterpillars on butterfly weed. There's a misconception to think that the milkweed toxins protect the monarch caterpillar and the monarch butterfly from predators. A number of animals do eat them. Some of the birds include familiar birds like brown thrashers, robins, grackles, cardinals. A western bird, the black-headed grosbeak, will eat the caterpillars until the toxins in its body reach a certain level, and then they'll just abstain. The toxin in the butterflies falls over in the adults over the winter, and researchers have concluded that birds and mice eat about 14% of the overwintering monarchs, and then other insects, including wasps, will eat the eggs and larvae. The flowers, though, are on milkweed attract a variety of insects, and here you have a black swallowtail on a butterfly milkweed, and here you have a sulfur, probably a common sulfur on a butterfly milkweed. Besides the monarch butterfly, there's a moth, the milkweed tussock moth, that feeds on milkweed. Unlike the female monarch butterfly, the female tussock moth will lay several eggs or even a cluster of eggs on a single plant. And so it's not unusual to find a number of caterpillars on a plant. And they feed in groups until their third instar, and then while they're feeding, they actually skeletonize the leaf. And you'll notice it's hairy. Well, the leaves on the hairs on these caterpillars is irritating to human skin. When they're ready to pupate, they drop to the ground in the fall and pupate at the base of the milkweed. The bodies of the adults in general resemble the caterpillar, but the wings are plain and nondescript gray. It's not a particularly showy moth, but they do click in flight, and researchers think that's in order to tell bats that these moths are unpalatable. So here's a picture of a monarch butterfly, red milkweed beetle, large milkweed bug. What's the common factor? Well, the color, isn't it? It's a rather showy orange and black. They're announcing to predators that they're tough. Monarchs are famous for being mimics of each other. There's two species found in Florida, one the queen, the other the soldier, that closely resemble the monarch. In fact, they're in the same genus. They all feed on milkweed. Their colors and patterns warn predators to avoid me. But the most famous monarch mimic is probably the viceroy butterfly, a distant relative. They're pretty easy to tell apart. You'll notice in this photograph I took of the viceroy that the hind wings have a distinct bar going across both wings. It turns out there's two kinds of mimicry. One is called Batesian, and that's where a non-toxic, a palatable insect or animal resembles, it's otherwise harmless, resembles something that's distasteful, venomous, harmful. Among snakes, for example, milk snakes resemble coral snakes where they occur, both species occur. In fact, in Florida, there's a one called the scarlet king snake. It's same species as the milk snake we have in Illinois, but it looks very, very different. It looks very much like a coral snake. But there's also something called Mullerian mimicry, and that's when two or more species share the same quality of being unpalatable, venomous, whatever. For a long time, it was thought that the viceroy and the monarch were examples of Batesian mimicry, but research have discovered that, in fact, viceroys are distasteful, and so it becomes Mullerian mimicry. They both are announcing to potential predators, if you eat me, you'll regret it. I spend a good part of the year in Florida, and I'm seeing more and more a plant called tropical milkweed. It blooms year round. It's a very popular ornamental plant. A lot of people in Florida grow it, but it's not native and it's escaped. In fact, it's the milkweed species I see the most. And it's found throughout Florida and other southern states. There's some controversy about it. It's easy to propagate, and so that's one reason why if you go to a nursery, a big box store with a garden section, you'll find tropical milkweed for sale. The caterpillars love it, they eat it, but it has a protozoan parasite in it that prevents many caterpillar larvae from maturing. Sometimes it kills them before they can even form their chrysalis. It seems to disorient migratory patterns among further north when it's used. Xerces Society, which is one of the prominent invertebrate conservation organization, urges people not to use it because of this protozoan and because it's lowering migration success of the monarch butterflies. Now, it's easy to grow milkweed, so I'm going to go over some of the things I do, recognizing that, in fact, that some species are commercially available. I like using species in DuPage County that I find in DuPage County. Common milkweed, swamp milkweed, whorled milkweed, and butterfly milkweed, especially common in swamp milkweed. So very quickly, the seeds can be sowed indoors in the fall after they've been stratified. What I do, though, is I take these plastic milk jugs, I cut them off 2, 3, 4 inches from the bottom after drilling some drainage holes. I leave a little flap on the handle side. I put a few inches of seed starting mix, damp seed starting mix in the bottom, spread seeds in it, pat them down, spray them down, tape it up, and I leave it outside over the winter. I gather seeds in the fall, and I don't really have to go far because I have milkweed in my own yard. So you could, if you like, is tie small bags around the pods before they open and collect the seeds. When the pods open, you can come around and collect them. That's generally what I do. I let the seeds dry for at least a week before I plant them, and sometimes longer. It is important to remember not to store the seeds in plastic because that retains moisture and the seeds will mold. You can use paper bags, you can use manila envelopes. Really, paper envelope of any kind will work. It's easier to grow milkweed if you know which ones you're growing. So, try to find the plants you want to get seeds from when they're in bloom. Collect the pods when the pods open up. Separate, if you can, separate the fluff from the seeds, which I will acknowledge is a lot easier said than done. Store the pods and seeds in paper bag if you're not going to plant them right away, and then just plant them. Now you can go online. There's many very detailed, excellent instructions, and I recommend looking at a few of them. But here you can see this is a swamp milkweed that I grew, and after I took this photo, I transplanted it. Well, I want to thank you for letting me present this to you. If you have any questions, you can email me at the address below, but let me know what you think. Thanks for letting me present this program to you.